You'll read something in a moment that feels familiar, almost like an echo from a dream you couldn't fully name, but stay with it, because we're about to shift the angle just enough that a deeper truth becomes visible. They tell you that manifestation rises from mindset alone. Change the thought and the life follows. And while there's a fragment of truth in that idea, you can probably feel how incomplete it is. Thoughts don't build your reality. They're reflections, surface ripples hinting at something moving far beneath. What actually shapes the world around you is the quiet broadcast your nervous system sends out every moment you're alive. That signal is the part of you choosing whether you step into openness and expansion or tighten into survival and scarcity. And if your body doesn't feel safe, if even a faint hum of threat lingers under your awareness, you won't be summoning miracles. You'll be attracting more turbulence, more situations to wrestle with, more noise that keeps you busy instead of aligned. You know the seasons when you've worked hard at doing everything right. The vision board is spotless. The affirmations roll off your tongue. The meditation streak glows with consistency. And yet the reality around you refuses to shift. It's not that the practices are flawed. It's that you're layering them on top of a system still bracing for impact. Your conscious mind might declare, "I'm open, I'm worthy," but your body might still whisper, "Protect yourself. Something could go wrong." And the field, the subtle realm of possibility, doesn't respond to the words you recite. It responds to the state you embody, the frequency you actually feel. We live in a world that trains most nervous systems into chronic overdrive, always scanning for the next problem, always preparing for a threat that might never arrive. And your body, loyal and literal, can't distinguish between a genuine danger and a stressful message on your screen. Both light the same internal alarm, both contract your energy, both close the channel that miracles require. It's not that the extraordinary disappears when you shift into survival. It's that you stop inhabiting the place where the extraordinary can reach you. As you sit with that closing realization that miracles don't vanish, you just lose access to their frequency. Something else starts to reveal itself beneath the surface. It's the quiet understanding that your nervous system isn't a bystander in the manifestation process. It's the engine, the transmitter, the core technology underneath every shift you've ever tried to create. And once you see that, everything clicks into a new configuration. Because the truth is this: your nervous system is shaping your reality long before the mind formulates a single intention. The body broadcasts first. The world responds second. Let that sink in. When your system is grounded and open, you send out a resonance that says, "I'm available. I can hold what I'm calling in. I'm steady enough to receive." But when you're stuck in survival mode, even subtly, the broadcast shifts into something completely different. Something like, "I'm uncertain, I'm overwhelmed. I need to protect myself before I can expand." The field, sensitive to the tone of that frequency, mirrors it back with uncanny precision. And this is where many people feel confused, because mentally they believe they're aligned. Mentally they feel ready. Mentally they're repeating all the right words. But the field doesn't respond to mental declarations. It responds to energetic coherence. You may notice this pattern when you think back to times in your life where everything felt strangely resistant. You wanted growth, yet everything tightened. You wanted clarity, yet everything grew foggy. You wanted movement, yet every step felt like wading through mud. Often, that resistance wasn't coming from the universe. It was coming from a nervous system broadcasting static instead of signal. And here's where the physics becomes fascinating. Even if we explain it gently, metaphorically, without pretending we're describing a rigid formula, when the body is in survival mode, the energy collapses inward, attention narrows, perception shrinks. The system diverts resources toward protection rather than connection. From that state, the resonance you send into the field becomes inconsistent, fragmented, or distorted. Imagine trying to tune into a particular radio station while someone keeps twisting the dial. The message never comes through clearly. The reception keeps dropping. You lose parts of the transmission. You miss the guidance that would have helped you move forward. This is exactly what happens when you attempt to manifest from a dysregulated state. The intention may be noble, the desire may be authentic, but the underlying broadcast is shaky, and reality echoes the shakiness back. You might call in opportunities that almost open but don't. You might attract relationships that start beautifully but destabilize quickly. You might get flashes of abundance but struggle to sustain them. It's not a failure of manifestation. It's a mismatch of frequency. But here's the part that matters most. None of this is your fault. You weren't taught to listen to your body. You weren't taught to regulate. You weren't taught that your nervous system is a sacred instrument, one that shapes your experience far more than your thoughts ever will. And this is where the idea of alignment stops being abstract or mystical and becomes intensely practical. Alignment isn't about forcing yourself into positivity. It's not about pretending to feel safe. It's not about bypassing discomfort with pretty language. Alignment is the biological state of safety that allows your energy to expand. When your system trusts that it's not in danger, even subtly, something remarkable unfolds. Possibility becomes accessible again. Creativity returns. Intuition strengthens. Opportunities feel less like risks and more like invitations. You stop gripping reality with your bare hands and begin to dance with it instead. Consider the difference between speaking your intentions from a clenched jaw versus speaking them from softened breath. One communicates pressure, the other communicates readiness. Your nervous system knows the difference instantly. So does the field. When you step into coherence, not perfection, not a constant high, but genuine coherence, your entire broadcast reorganizes. And the physical world responds with its own reorganization. People shift, circumstances shift, timing shifts, support shows up from unexpected angles. Because coherence doesn't just change how you feel, it changes what you're able to receive. And that's why nervous system work isn't a side practice, it's the foundation. It's the tuning mechanism for the life you're trying to create. Without it, manifestation becomes guesswork. With it, manifestation becomes participation, a collaboration between your embodied state and the field that listens to it. So as we move forward, keep this truth close. You don't manifest from thoughts alone. You manifest from the frequency your body is brave enough to hold. That last truth, that you manifest from the frequency your body is brave enough to hold, opens a doorway into the next layer of this work. Because once you understand that embodiment precedes intention, you begin to see how easily the nervous system gets pulled out of presence and into something far more deceptive, the simulated future your mind keeps constructing. Here's the part few people realize: the survival system doesn't wait for real danger. It anticipates it. It invents it. It rehearses it. And in that rehearsal, your body responds as if the imagined scenario is already unfolding. You've lived this more times than you can count, driving home and realizing you don't remember entire stretches of the road, standing in the shower while your mind spins half a dozen disaster scenarios, trying to sleep while replaying a conversation you had 3 days ago. Your body isn't in the moment. It's inside a hologram created by fear. And yet this hologram feels real, because survival programming is ancient, primal, and exquisitely efficient. You don't have to consciously think, what if this goes wrong? Your body predicts it before the thought appears. The brain fires warning signals, muscles tense, breath shortens, and suddenly you're living in a future that hasn't happened and may never arrive. This is the cost of mental simulation, not the imagination itself. Imagination is a creative gift. But the hijacking of that imagination by fear, when you drift into those loops, you're no longer manifesting possibilities. You're manifesting protection, you're manifesting vigilance, you're manifesting an identity built on preparing for impact. And the universe responding to vibration, rather than language, mirrors the vibration of preparation. The field doesn't interpret "I'm thinking ahead" as wisdom. It interprets it as threat. It feels the tension in your chest. It senses the constriction in your breath. It detects the guarded edge in your energy. And it shapes the timeline to match that guarded state, not as punishment, simply as correspondence. Because the field listens to coherence more than it listens to hope. Think of it like this: when your mind spirals into imagined danger, your body spirals with it. It contracts, bracing as if the blow is already inbound. And that contraction becomes a signal, a clear, measurable frequency that says, "Send me more situations that require me to stay on guard." You may not mean it. You may not want it, but the nervous system doesn't speak in metaphors. It speaks in tone, and tone shapes reality. This is why people who live in their heads often feel perpetually exhausted. They're fighting battles that don't exist, solving problems that haven't arrived, playing chess against opponents who aren't even on the board. Every imagined scenario drains real energy. Every mental rehearsal pulls the body deeper into survival mode. You may notice that this simulated future always has the same flavor: something goes wrong, something slips, something collapses. Rarely does the survival system simulate miraculous outcomes. That's because its job isn't expansion, it's preservation. But here's the irony no one warns you about. By trying to protect you, it traps you. By trying to keep you safe, it keeps you small. By trying to predict danger, it disconnects you from possibility. And the moment you disconnect from possibility, manifestation becomes static. Everything loses movement because your awareness is no longer in the only place anything can shift the present. Survival programming pulls you into an imaginary future. Manifestation pulls you into embodied presence. Those two states cannot coexist. When you live in projected timelines, you lose access to intuition, that inner navigation system that requires silence, spaciousness, and receptivity. Intuition doesn't bloom inside mental tension. It blooms inside coherence. It blooms when the body no longer feels hunted by what might happen next. And this brings us to a quiet but life-changing realization. Most of the fear you feel isn't coming from your circumstances. It's coming from the future you've been rehearsing without realizing it. You're not reacting to what's happening. You're reacting to what your mind insists could happen. Once you see that, something inside you softens, not because the worries disappear instantly, but because you realize they were ghosts, projections, echoes from a nervous system doing its best to protect you, even if its methods are outdated. And in that softening, presence becomes possible again. Not forced, not fabricated, just available. The moment you return to presence, the simulated future dissolves. The body unbraces. The field feels the shift, and manifestation begins to respond to a different broadcast, one rooted in now, not in what if. You can feel how that last insight, the dissolving of the simulated future, leaves a kind of quiet spaciousness behind it. And in that space, another truth rises to the surface. Subtle at first, but undeniable once it's named. Your nervous system isn't only reacting to imagined danger, it's also reacting to remembered danger, and even to danger it never personally lived through, but inherited. This is where the story deepens. Because once you stop traveling into the future, the body reveals the past it has been carrying. And not just your past, layers of memory, echo, imprint woven through your lineage, passed through biology, shaped by generations who survived things you will never fully know. You may notice moments where your reaction doesn't match your situation. Someone's tone feels sharper than it was. A delay feels like abandonment. A simple request feels like pressure. A new opportunity feels strangely threatening. It's not irrationality, it's memory. The nervous system makes predictions based not just on what you consciously recall, but on everything that has ever felt overwhelming, confusing, sudden, destabilizing. Sometimes those impressions are yours. Sometimes they belong to the people who came before you, carried forward in the body as if the story never ended. And science, in its early and humble way, is beginning to observe what mystics and healers have sensed for ages, that emotional experiences can leave marks not just in the psyche, but in the chemistry of being. Patterns of vigilance, patterns of scarcity, patterns of distrust, patterns of contraction. Your ancestors may have lived through scarcity you'll never face. Their bodies learn to tighten, to guard, to brace, and that imprint can echo forward, not as fate, but as a starting point. Consider this: your nervous system is always trying to protect you, but it doesn't always have updated information. It's using the data it has, which might be decades old, or generations old, or formed when you were too young to understand what was happening. So when something good approaches, the body might interpret it as danger simply because nothing in its database resembles safety in that form. When intimacy deepens, when visibility increases, when abundance appears without effort, the nervous system may respond as if the unfamiliar itself is risky. This is how emotional memory becomes prediction. Your body isn't reacting to now, it's predicting what could happen based on what once happened, and then without meaning to, it prepares you for an experience that no longer exists. You can see this in subtle ways. A tightening in the chest you can't explain. A pulling back from connection even when you crave closeness. A hesitation toward expansion you consciously desire. A reflex to shrink even when nobody is asking you to. These reflexes aren't personality flaws. They're survival strategies formed long before you had language for them. And here's where the cycle deepens. The body not only predicts based on old memory, it tries to fulfill that prediction. This isn't self-sabotage, it's consistency. Survival systems prefer the familiar, even when the familiar is uncomfortable. So if your body expects disappointment, it will move in ways that minimize hope. If it expects conflict, it will brace before harmony has a chance to land. If it expects loss, it will cling or avoid, shaping interactions in ways that confirm the expectation. This is the hidden architecture beneath repeating life patterns. Not punishment, not fate, just the body trying to keep you safe based on outdated information. Imagine the nervous system like an ancient librarian guarding dusty archives, convinced that the old stories are still relevant. It uses them to decide how much openness you're allowed, how much abundance you can tolerate, how much joy you can hold before instinctively pulling away. And this is why you can outgrow a mindset long before you outgrow a pattern. Because mindset updates quickly. The nervous system updates slowly, not because it's stubborn, but because it's thorough. It needs evidence. It needs new experiences. It needs repeated, gentle proof that reality has shifted, that the threats it was guarding you from no longer exist. This is why healing is less about thinking differently and more about feeling differently. Because sensation is the language the body trusts. Presence is the language safety speaks. Repetition is the language that rewires. And as you begin offering your system new experiences of safety, not perfect safety, not constant safety, but grounded safety, something incredible begins to change. The inherited echoes soften. The predictions loosen. The body stops replaying old stories as if they're still unfolding. You start responding to life instead of reenacting the past. You start meeting the moment instead of bracing for an old one. You start feeling possibility where fear used to live. And in that shift, alignment becomes accessible again, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. Because when the weight of past and inherited memory stops steering the present, the field finally receives a new broadcast from you, one shaped not by what was, but by what's now possible. As that last layer settles, the recognition that your body might still be organizing your life around stories it never chose another pattern begins to surface. It's the pattern that keeps so many people stuck without ever realizing the trap they're in. Because once those inherited echoes start predicting your reality, your nervous system begins scanning the world for proof that its predictions are correct. And it always finds something. This is the hidden machinery of somatic confirmation bias, not the mental version you've read about, but the embodied version that operates beneath language, beneath logic, beneath willpower. The body looks for what feels familiar, not what's true. It searches for what matches its internal map, not what reflects your growth. And because it's trying to keep you safe, it filters experience through a lens shaped by past and inherited memory. This means you don't perceive reality as it is. You perceive it as your nervous system expects it to be. Start to notice the subtle ways this shows up. A neutral expression on someone's face becomes a sign of disapproval. A delayed response becomes evidence of rejection. An unexpected bill becomes proof that abundance isn't meant for you. A small mistake becomes confirmation that you're still not ready. Nothing dramatic needs to happen. The interpretation happens automatically, effortlessly, instantly. And the moment the body interprets something as threat adjacent, the survival system engages, muscles tighten, breath shortens, focus narrows, energy withdraws from possibility and reorients back toward protection. You're no longer interacting with the moment, you're interacting with the meaning the nervous system assigned to the moment. It becomes a loop that feels real because it feels familiar, and the familiar is seductive, even when it's painful. This is why people recreate the same relationship dynamics, the same financial patterns, the same emotional cycles, the same limits, not because they lack discipline or clarity, but because their nervous system is trying to prove itself right. A system built for survival needs predictability more than it needs joy. Safety, to the nervous system, often means the known, even when the known is restrictive, even when the known is outdated, even when the known is so much smaller than who you've become. But here's the turning point. Once you understand that your nervous system filters reality before you consciously interpret it, you start questioning the filter itself. You start noticing how much of your life is shaped not by events, but by interpretations, not by facts, but by somatic echoes, not by destiny, but by a body trying to keep you from experiencing anything too unfamiliar, even if the unfamiliar is exactly what you've been praying for. And in this awareness, something powerful becomes possible. You can begin updating the filter, not by forcing the body to see the world differently, not by arguing with your fear, not by trying to positive think your way into expansion, but by teaching your nervous system, slowly and repeatedly, that not every sensation of unfamiliarity equals danger, that not every pause in communication equals rejection, that not every challenge equals collapse, that not every moment of openness will lead to pain. This is where presence becomes medicine. When you pause long enough to question your automatic interpretations, your body receives new information. It learns that the cue it labeled as threat is actually neutral or even supportive. And when this happens repeatedly, the survival prediction begins to loosen its grip. Consider how different your life becomes when your body no longer defaults to bracing. Opportunities become visible again. People feel less intimidating. The world feels less sharp. Possibility feels less suspicious. Ease no longer feels like a trap. Because when the filter updates, the future updates with it. And here's the part that may surprise you. The universe isn't withholding anything. It's not waiting for you to prove yourself. It's not testing you. It's simply mirroring the signal you send. When the somatic filter shifts, what you're able to perceive and therefore receive shifts with it. This means the answer to why is nothing changing is often hidden in the body, not the mind. The field might be offering you 100 subtle openings, but if your system labels them as suspicious, unfamiliar, or unsafe, you won't recognize them as openings at all. You'll walk past the door that was meant for you because your body learned long ago that new doors might hurt. But once the filter changes, once the body begins to interpret life through the lens of safety rather than threat, something extraordinary happens. The same world looks different. The same moments feel different. The same possibilities, once invisible, begin to shimmer with clarity. Because for the first time, you're not seeing reality through old memory. You're seeing it through presence, through attunement, through openness. And from that place, manifestation stops feeling like a struggle and starts feeling like recognition, not chasing what you want, but noticing what's already reaching for you. The moment you begin seeing through that old filter, the one built from memory instead of truth, something even deeper begins to rise from within you. It's subtle at first, like a shift in temperature, like a breeze passing through a room you didn't realize was closed. And the shift is this: as soon as your nervous system loosens its grip on the past, it reveals another pattern it has been guarding, the pattern of rejecting the very things you've been asking for. Because here's the quiet paradox no one warns you about when your body has lived in survival for long enough. Goodness feels dangerous. It sounds strange until you feel it in your own chest. A compliment that should feel warm instead makes you tense. An easy opportunity feels untrustworthy. A moment of intimacy feels like a setup. Receiving feels like exposure, and you may not say it out loud, you may not even fully realize it, but deep inside, your system is whispering. This is too much, too fast, too unfamiliar. It's not rejecting the blessing. It's protecting you from the sensation of vulnerability that the blessing brings. The survival system doesn't distinguish between vulnerability that harms you and vulnerability that heals you. It just sees openness and thinks, unsafe. And so the very things you pray for, expansion, abundance, love, visibility, ease, become the things your body subtly resists. Not because you're unworthy, not because you're broken, but because receiving requires openness, and openness is the opposite of survival. Notice how this plays out in the smallest ways. Someone offers support, and you instinctively say, "I'm fine, I've got it." Someone expresses interest, and you downplay your feelings. Someone praises your work, and you shrink the moment. Life hands you spaciousness, and you fill it with busyness. A door opens, and you hesitate at the threshold. Why? Because receiving asks you to soften, and softening feels like letting go of control. And letting go of control feels like danger to a system trained to stay alert. This is why many people chase manifestation but can't hold it. They attract glimpses of what they desire, but the somatic threshold is too low to sustain it. The nervous system only allows as much expansion as it believes it can survive. And whenever the expansion rises above that threshold, the body contracts quietly, instinctively, protectively. You may recognize this contraction, that tightening in the ribs when someone gets too close, that flutter of panic when an opportunity accelerates, that sudden urge to withdraw when things start going well, that impulse to sabotage a good moment before it can turn on you. These aren't failures. They're safety strategies. Your body is not your enemy. It's your historian. It remembers everything you endured and everything that overwhelmed you. It learned that too much openness can lead to hurt, so it protects you by slamming the brakes right when your blessings arrive. And here's the part that stings a little, but frees you once you see it. Your life isn't limited by what you want. It's limited by what your body feels safe receiving. People don't manifest small because they think small. They manifest small because their nervous system only feels safe with what's familiar. This is why someone can hold a vision of abundance in their mind, yet live in scarcity in their body. Why someone can affirm love daily, yet stiffen the moment affection reaches them. Why someone can desire expansion, yet panic when life begins to expand. Your nervous system organizes your reality around what it believes you can handle, not what your mind hopes you can handle. And the moment you understand this, you realize something powerful. Manifestation is not blocked by lack of effort. It's blocked by lack of somatic permission, which means the solution isn't trying harder. It's feeling safer when the body trusts itself. Receiving becomes natural when the body feels safe. Doors don't feel threatening. When the body softens, blessings don't feel overwhelming. When the body opens, alignment doesn't feel like risk. It feels like home. You may have noticed that whenever life brings you something beautiful, there's a split-second window, a moment where your heart either expands or contracts. That window is where your entire frequency reorganizes. If the body contracts, the moment slips. If the body expands, the moment deepens. And this is the work beneath all other work, increasing your capacity to hold the goodness that life has been trying to deliver for years. Because the truth is, life hasn't been ignoring you. It's been waiting for you to feel safe enough to receive what's already yours. And once you begin rewiring that threshold, once your nervous system experiences safety not as a rare event, but as a baseline, something extraordinary happens. The blessings that once felt overwhelming begin to feel natural. The opportunities that once felt too big begin to feel like your size. The love that once scared you begins to feel like your language. Because for the first time, your nervous system isn't rejecting the life you want. It's preparing to hold it. You can feel how that last realization that your body might be rejecting the very life you've been calling in creates a kind of inner silence, almost like the moment after a deep exhale. And in that silence, a new truth begins to reveal itself with surprising clarity. Safety isn't the reward for alignment. Safety is the alignment. This is the pivot most people never make, because they're taught to chase the elevated states. First, gratitude, high vibration, abundance consciousness, without tending to the biological foundation those states require. You can't build expansion on top of a system that's still defending. You can't sustain openness inside a body that expects the world to turn at any moment. You can't embody abundance through a physiology convinced that survival is the priority. And yet, this is exactly what so many spiritual teachings unintentionally encourage. Leap into the expansion, they say, as if the body will simply come along for the ride. But the body is not a passenger. It's the vehicle. It's the transmitter. It's the foundation of your signal. When the body doesn't feel safe, even the most beautiful spiritual practices become layered noise. The affirmations don't land. The visualizations don't stick. The intentions don't root. And the field doesn't hear the words you speak. It hears the frequency your body is vibrating beneath those words. So the real question isn't, how do I raise my vibration? The real question is, how do I feel safe enough for my vibration to rise on its own? Because here's the truth. Very few people name aloud true manifestation is somatic, not just energetic. Safety reorganizes your entire frequency from the inside out. When the body softens, the field responds differently. When the body opens, reality opens. When the body trusts, intuition sharpens. When the body stops defending, synchronicity arrives. Safety is what allows expansion. Safety is what allows receiving. Safety is what allows you to hold more without collapsing. Think about what happens in the absence of safety. You cling. You overthink. You brace. You prepare for loss, even while hoping for gain. Every step toward expansion carries the weight of potential threat. The system tries to evolve and survive simultaneously, and that's an impossible equation. You cannot be in defense and receptivity at the same time. You cannot expand while contracting. You cannot invite miracles while bracing for impact. But when safety enters the system, everything recalibrates. Breath deepens, awareness widens, the inner static quiets. Your field grows more coherent not because you forced it, but because nothing is interrupting it anymore. And that coherence is what the universe responds to. You've felt versions of this in your own life, moments where clarity arrives out of nowhere, where timing works effortlessly, where something you once struggled to find suddenly falls into place without effort. Those moments didn't come from trying harder. They came from a temporary state of somatic ease. Your body opened, even if by accident. Your field cleared, even if just for a moment. And reality flowed through that opening. This is why safety is the secret ingredient underneath every manifestation practice. Because without safety, alignment becomes performance. With safety, alignment becomes natural. But let's slow this down further, because safety isn't a concept, it's a sensation. Safety is felt in the weight of your exhale, in the softness behind your sternum, in the grounding of your feet, in the quieting of your mind when your system finally believes, I don't need to fight right now. You can't convince your body into safety with logic. You can only invite it into safety through presence. And presence is the gateway that shifts everything. Presence is where the nervous system stops predicting and starts listening. Presence is where intuition begins speaking again. Presence is where your energy coheres into a steady broadcast the field can actually register. When your body feels safe, your consciousness returns home. And when consciousness returns home, your manifestation bandwidth widens. You start making decisions without panic. You take action without fear. You move toward opportunities without bracing for what could go wrong. You trust your internal signals because they're no longer distorted by survival static. Safety is the foundation that makes intuition trustworthy again, not because the world becomes predictable, but because you become coherent. And as your coherence stabilizes, you start to experience something profound. Reality doesn't just respond to your energy, it reorganizes around it. Situations that once triggered you lose their charge. People who once drained you fall away. Opportunities that once felt distant begin circling closer. Life stops feeling adversarial. You stop feeling hunted by time because the universe doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be present. And presence is impossible without safety. This is why regulation isn't optional. It's the hinge, the bridge, the tuning mechanism. When you regulate, you step into the version of yourself capable of receiving what your mind has been trying to call in for years. And that's the doorway we're walking toward now, because once safety enters the system, your entire field shifts into a new expression. You begin to access a kind of embodied magnetism that thought alone could never create. You can feel how the recognition of safety as alignment changes the atmosphere inside you, as if your inner architecture subtly rearranges itself. And from that rearrangement, something new starts to rise, the realization that when your nervous system is regulated, you don't just feel different, you broadcast differently. And that broadcast changes how the world interacts with you in ways that are both subtle and profound. Because a regulated nervous system isn't passive, it's magnetic. Not in the superficial sense, not in the think positive and glow kind of way, but in the literal, somatic way. A tuning fork hums with clarity and influences everything vibrating near it. When you're regulated, your presence shifts before you ever speak a word. The field around you becomes coherent. Your energy stops scattering. Your awareness widens. You stop leaking attention into imagined futures or past wounds. You inhabit yourself fully, and people feel that immediately, even if they can't explain why. Think about the last time you met someone who felt grounded. Their voice didn't rush. Their eyes didn't dart. Their energy didn't demand anything. They weren't performing, proving, or predicting. They were present, and something in your body softened just by being near them. That's not charisma. That's regulation. And here's where it gets fascinating: when your nervous system rests in coherence, every interaction becomes an extension of that state. You don't have to try to make opportunities flow. You don't have to force synchronicities. You don't have to overthink decisions. Your presence becomes a signal the field can read clearly, and the field responds to clarity like metal responds to a magnet. Let's explore this more deeply. A dysregulated system enters a room scanning for danger. A regulated system enters a room attuned to possibility. A dysregulated system braces for misunderstanding. A regulated system invites connection. A dysregulated system performs. A regulated system expresses. A dysregulated system worries about messing up. A regulated system trusts its timing. And because your physiology shapes your interpretation of reality, the world mirrors the state you bring into it. When you're braced, people unconsciously mirror that tension. Conversations become more guarded. Opportunities feel constrained. Interactions feel effortful. But when you're open, grounded, steady, people relax into your presence. They become more generous, more receptive, more collaborative. You become easier to help. You become easier to trust. You become easier to say yes to. This isn't manipulation, it's resonance. Let's make it even more concrete. Imagine two people walking into an opportunity: a job interview, a pitch meeting, a new relationship, a collaboration. Both are intelligent, capable, and sincere, but one carries subtle somatic tension: shoulders slightly raised, breath slightly shallow, mind slightly scattered. Their nervous system whispers, "I hope this goes well. I need this to go well. I'm not sure I'm safe if this falls through." Even if they speak beautifully, their underlying frequency broadcasts urgency, and urgency constricts the field. Now imagine the other person. They enter with a different tone in their body. Their breath is steady. Their awareness is spacious. Their presence isn't desperate, it's receptive. They're not clinging to an outcome. They're not defending themselves from imagined disappointment. Their nervous system says, "Whatever happens here, I can hold it. I'm already whole." That frequency doesn't pull, it invites. It doesn't grasp, it allows. It doesn't prove, it expresses. People feel this difference in seconds. One person feels like weight, the other feels like possibility, and possibility is magnetic. This is why manifestation becomes easier when your nervous system is regulated, not because the universe suddenly favors you, but because you're no longer communicating mixed signals. You stop saying, "I want this," while your body whispers, "I'm not ready." You stop attracting situations that mirror your fear loops because your system is no longer broadcasting threat. A regulated nervous system sends a clean message: "I can hold what I'm asking for," and the field responds with clarity. But magnetism isn't only about opportunity, it also changes your relationships. When your system is grounded, you stop interpreting everything through the lens of danger. You stop assuming people are judging, rejecting, or abandoning you. You stop reading into pauses, silences, or small fluctuations in tone. Your presence gives others permission to soften. Conflict becomes manageable instead of catastrophic. Intimacy becomes nourishing instead of overwhelming. People trust what they feel in your energy long before they trust what they hear in your words. And when your presence carries coherence, you become someone others naturally gravitate toward, not because you're flawless, but because it feels safe to be themselves around you. Creativity also shifts. Ideas flow without the chokehold of perfectionism. Inspiration arrives without force. Action becomes intuitive instead of anxiety-driven. You stop wasting energy on anticipating disaster and start using that energy to create. Decision-making transforms too. You no longer analyze from fear. You sense from alignment. Your system knows what yes feels like. Your system knows what no feels like. Your system stops confusing familiarity with safety. And because you're no longer reacting, you're responding. Your path unfolds with a kind of effortless clarity that once felt out of reach. This is the essence of embodied magnetism. Not magic, not performance, not mindset alone. Regulated presence, a state where your body becomes the signal, your field becomes the transmission, and your life begins to reorganize around the coherence you've finally learned to hold. You can feel how that embodied magnetism, that coherence you've finally learned to hold, creates a kind of inner spaciousness, almost like the air around you has shifted texture. And in that spaciousness, a new question emerges with almost gravitational pull. How do I stabilize this? How do I turn this from a moment into a baseline? Because magnetism isn't a one-time event. It's a practiced frequency, a cultivated state, a trained nervous system. And this is where we move from theory into embodiment, not through force, not through spiritual performance, not through the pressure to stay high vibe, but through a gentle, repeatable practice that works with the body instead of against it. A practice that rewires identity, not just behavior. A practice that shifts the baseline, not just the moment. A practice that teaches your nervous system a new truth. It is safe to be open here. This is the deeper essence beneath the 3-breath repatterning technique you were introduced to earlier. But now, instead of seeing it as a relaxation exercise, you'll begin to understand it as a mechanism for identity shift, a way of changing who you are at the level the universe listens to most closely. Because each breath is more than oxygen, each breath is an instruction, each breath is a message to your subconscious and your field. Each breath teaches your system a new way of being. Let's step into this slowly, intentionally, and with the reverence it deserves. Breath 1, receptivity, the unlearning of defense. This breath isn't just about inhaling, it's about unlearning the ancient reflex that equates openness with danger. When you draw breath into the heart space, you're doing something radical. You're telling your body that it no longer needs to guard every direction at once. You're whispering to your system, it's safe to widen here, safe to expand here, safe to stop bracing. This first breath rewires the identity of the one who must stay tight to stay safe. And as you exhale and imagine your field expanding outward, something subtle but profound happens. You experience yourself not as a closed system, but as a permeable one, a being capable of allowing life to reach you. That somatic experience is the first crack in the old identity, the one built from scarcity, vigilance, and contraction. Because identity isn't changed by thought, identity is changed by sensation. And this breath introduces your system to the sensation of openness without collapse. Repeated often enough, it becomes your new normal. Breath 2, release the unlearning of carrying everything. Most people think they're tired because of what's happening in their lives. But exhaustion comes from what the nervous system refuses to let go of. Old stories, old emotions, old roles, memories you've outgrown, fears that never belonged to you, tension that once protected you but now only weighs you down. The second breath creates a somatic pathway out of that burden. When you inhale into the heart and exhale downward, letting the weight sink through your body into the earth, you are telling your system something it has long forgotten. You don't have to carry this anymore. And the more your body practices letting go without losing itself, the more it begins to rewrite a core identity imprint, the one that believes survival requires holding everything together at all times. This is the unlearning of self-sacrifice, the unlearning of hyper-responsibility, the unlearning of emotional hoarding, because you manifest not from what you carry, but from what you allow to flow. A regulated nervous system flows. A dysregulated one clings. This breath teaches the art of release, not dramatic, not performative, but steady and cellular. Breath 3, embodied presence, the unlearning of time travel. If the first breath opens the system and the second breath lightens it, the third breath anchors it, right here, right now, in the only moment miracles can reach you. This breath isn't just calming, it's identity shifting. Each time you inhale and exhale with the quiet truth, right here, right now, I am safe. You interrupt the nervous system's ancient urge to flee into the past or the future. You reclaim your awareness from timelines that don't exist. You call your energy back from versions of yourself who were still bracing. This breath builds the identity of someone who lives in presence rather than prediction, because the universe doesn't respond to who you were. It doesn't respond to who you fear you might become. It responds to who you are in this breath. Presence is the vibration of trust. Trust is the vibration of coherence. Coherence is the vibration the field mirrors back. The 3 breaths as identity work. When practiced consistently, this protocol doesn't just soothe you for a moment, it shifts the template your nervous system uses to define you. You become the one who opens, the one who releases, the one who returns to presence, the one whose energy communicates calm instead of chaos, the one whose field feels like truth, not tension. You become a different signal, and life reorganizes around that signal, not instantly, but inevitably, because identity is the deepest frequency of all. When who you are changes, what you attract cannot remain the same. This is the quiet power of the 3 breaths. They don't just regulate your system, they rewrite the embodied self you bring to the world. You can feel how those 3 breaths, that opening, that releasing, that returning, begin to sculpt a new version of you from the inside out. And as that version stabilizes, something extraordinary starts happening around you, almost quietly at first. Then unmistakably, life begins to reorganize itself to match your new baseline. Not because you're forcing anything, not because you're hustling for alignment, but because coherence radiates outward, and reality responds to coherence like a tuning fork answering its match. And this is where many people get shaken, because the reorganization doesn't always look like immediate blessings. Sometimes it looks like dismantling. Sometimes it looks like clarity that feels uncomfortable. Sometimes it looks like life removing what your nervous system once tolerated, but that your new frequency can no longer hold. Because when your baseline shifts, your tolerance for misalignment drops. What was once survivable becomes intolerable. What you once endured without question becomes impossible to ignore. What once felt normal begins to feel heavy, tight, or false. And at first, that can feel like regression. But it's not regression, it's calibration. Your system is no longer willing to contract itself to fit an environment built for your old self. Your energy won't shrink just to keep familiar dynamics intact. Your intuition stops whispering and starts making itself unmistakably clear. This is the moment where relationships shift, where stagnant jobs become unavoidably wrong, where old habits lose their gravitational pull, where excuses stop making sense, where the almost okay becomes undeniably misaligned. You're not falling apart, you're outgrowing the life that was built around your dysregulated state. And this is the part most people never prepare for when you return to coherence. The world around you has to either rise with you or fall away from you. Not as punishment, but as resonance. Because coherence cannot coexist with patterns built from fear. Presence cannot coexist with dynamics built from survival. Safety cannot coexist with relationships built on tension. Your nervous system begins sending out a different signal, and everything in your field responds with one of two reactions: expansion or exit. And yes, it can feel destabilizing at first, like your life is shifting beneath your feet, like the ground is rearranging itself without your permission, like everything is in motion all at once. But beneath that motion is something steady, a new frequency emerging. A frequency that no longer leaks energy into vigilance. A frequency that no longer tolerates emotional scarcity. A frequency that no longer builds connection through contraction. A frequency that no longer identifies with the version of you who had to brace to survive. You begin acting differently without trying to. Your boundaries shift without effort. Your choices become clearer without debate. Your intuition becomes louder without strain. Your presence becomes firmer without force. Opportunities that once overwhelmed you now feel aligned. Conversations you used to avoid now flow with ease. Support you once rejected becomes natural to receive. Coincidences increase not because the universe changed, but because you're finally able to see what was always trying to reach you. Synchronicity thrives in coherence. Incoherence repels it. And here's where the reorganization becomes truly miraculous, and life stops feeling like a series of problems to solve and starts feeling like a series of signals to follow. You begin moving with the current instead of against it. You begin trusting timing instead of fearing delay. You begin navigating from intuition instead of strategy. This isn't magical thinking, it's nervous system physiology expressed through energy. A regulated body interprets reality accurately. An unregulated body interprets reality through distortion. So when regulation becomes your baseline, the distortion dissolves. And when distortion dissolves, possibility becomes visible. Possibility that was always there, hidden behind the fog of survival. You start noticing doors you once walked past. You sense opportunities before they fully emerge. You attract people whose nervous systems resonate with your steadiness. You find yourself in the right conversations at the right moments. You receive invitations you once felt unworthy of. You say yes without fear and no without guilt, because coherence makes you unmistakably you. And when you become unmistakably you, the field can finally deliver what was meant for you, not the version of you shaped by vigilance, but the version shaped by safety, presence, and truth. This is the essence of a regulated baseline. Life no longer feels like something happening to you. It feels like something happening with you. A collaboration, a conversation, a dance of frequency meeting frequency. And step by step, breath by breath, you realize that manifestation was never about convincing the universe. It was about becoming the version of yourself who can hold what the universe has been trying to give you all along. You may notice that as this new coherence settles, as the dust of transformation drifts gently to the ground, a softer truth begins to emerge beneath everything we've explored. It's quieter than the breakthroughs, gentler than the revelations, but it carries the deepest resonance of all. Your life doesn't change because you push it into a new shape. It changes because you finally become available to the shape it always wanted to take. And that availability begins with safety, not the dramatic kind, not the perfect kind, the lived kind inside this breath, inside this moment. Feel that for a second. Right here, right now, nothing is demanding anything from you. Nothing is chasing you. Nothing is collapsing around you. You're simply here, present, breathing. This is the baseline. Your nervous system has been waiting for, the baseline that makes everything else possible. As your system stabilizes in this new frequency, life stops feeling adversarial. You no longer interpret every delay as a threat, every silence as rejection, every change as danger. You start seeing movement where you once saw obstacles. You start feeling resonance where you once felt tension. You start noticing that the world isn't withholding from you. it's responding to you. And because you've learned to rest in your body without bracing, you now meet life without bracing. That's the shift. That's the miracle. That's the quiet turning of the tide. You may find that relationships soften, opportunities feel closer, synchronicities increase, self-trust becomes accessible again. Your intuition speaks without the static that once drowned it out. Not because everything suddenly became easy, but because you're no longer living in opposition to yourself. The field can finally reach you, not around your fear, but through your coherence. You've become readable, available, aligned. And from this place, the invitation becomes simple, almost tender. If this work resonates, return to it, not as pressure, not as ritual for perfection, but as a quiet act of remembering, a daily homecoming, because regulation isn't an achievement, it's a practice. And practice is what turns transformation into identity. So as you step forward from this moment, let this be the gentle truth you carry. You are safe to receive. You are safe to expand. You are safe to let life support you in ways your old self could never imagine. Let your next breath be a doorway. Let your presence be the signal. Let your safety be the foundation for the reality rising to meet you.